Hello, my name is Margaret Meeks, and I'm an occupational therapy student at Ohio State. Today, I will be presenting on my capstone project looking at the use of play-based social emotional programming as a tool to improve self-regulation skills in preschoolers. So the initial part of my capstone project consisted of conducting a systematic review to answer this question. For children ages 0 to 6 with developmental conditions, does play-based sensory intervention increase self-regulation? This is an important topic because in early childhood, self-regulation skills are a vital predictor of success with regard to pre-academic skills, internalizing and externalizing behaviors, and social competence. And while all children can demonstrate challenges with self-regulation, these challenges are especially prevalent in children with developmental conditions. Evidence has also showed that incorporating play into sensory strategies can help enhance children's development with regard to social, emotional, and behavioral skills. So as I mentioned, I conducted a systematic review according to the PRISMA guidelines. For my literature review, I searched 3 databases, CINAHL, ERIC, and PsycInfo, which yielded a total of 1,052 articles. I then used the Cincinnati Children's Legend tool and the GRADE approach to assess the quality of evidence and strength of recommendations. After removing duplications and screening the articles, 12 articles ended up meeting my inclusion and exclusion criteria and were included in the systematic review. These studies that were included explored the effects of 5 categories of play-based sensory interventions, including social stories, dance and movement, music, yoga, as well as some other interventions, one of which was games, focusing on executive functioning, and then a social peer group. Some of the key ingredients of play-based sensory intervention identified by the literature were implementation during circle time using peer groups, the use of supportive adults as needed, child-directed, age-appropriate activities, the use of repetition to reinforce the message, and then a duration of at least 4 weeks, 1 to 4 sessions per week, each lasting for about 15 to 30 minutes. And then this picture on the screen is me at the AOTA conference in March. I had the privilege of presenting a poster about the systematic review I conducted for this capstone project. It was a lot of fun and I learned a lot. So my capstone project was a facility analysis of Nighsonger Center's early learning program in Columbus, Ohio, specifically focusing on the preschool classrooms. The early learning program is a full-day inclusive childcare program for children aged around 6 months to 5 years. They provide services in the classroom as well as in community-based settings like the home or daycare. The early learning program was identified as an appropriate place to complete my capstone because they currently do not have a social emotional curriculum in place for all preschool students. The social worker on site and her student created a social emotional small group program for students who will be going to kindergarten the following year, but there is nothing currently in place for all preschool students. Currently in the classrooms, educators implement social emotional strategies and techniques on a case-by-case basis when a situation arises where a child is feeling dysregulated. Educators do recognize that there is a need for a more consistent social emotional programming within their classrooms. So as I mentioned, I conducted a facility analysis to identify the barriers to implementation and strategies to overcome these barriers. I was able to assess the adaptability, accessibility, and feasibility of a play-based social emotional group by observing the preschool classroom to get an idea of how the students interact with the environment, their teachers, as well as their peers. And I also was able to start building relationships with the students and the teachers to better identify what activities might best suit their needs. I also created and completed an evidence-informed social emotional checklist and conducted stakeholder interviews to identify barriers to implementation. This image on the screen is a final adjusted algorithm that I created to help early learning programs assess their current social emotional programming. So through stakeholder interviews, I identified several facilitators and barriers to implementation of a consistent social emotional program. Each of the preschool classrooms at the early learning program have one lead teacher and then 1 to 2 other classroom teachers or aides to help support the classroom needs. So there is a great supportive environment in each of the preschool classrooms. I also received support from all the educators and support staff with regard to implementing a social emotional program. And the early learning program, they have access to a lot of materials as well as access to funding. So there was no additional cost associated with implementing a social emotional program. With regard to barriers, educators identified that there is additional time and training required to create a social emotional program. The early learning program is open from around 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So it's difficult for educators to find time to create social emotional lessons and a curriculum. And educators also identified that it's difficult to find ways to adapt activities for students for, say, a 3-year-old versus a 5-year-old or students with varying motor skill levels. With regard to fidelity, educators identified that it would be difficult to adhere to a social emotional program without easily accessible resources and materials. And then educators also identified that it is difficult to sustain a program like this because of the ever-changing preschool environment. So the early learning program might have a student from the growing classroom downstairs come up to the preschool classroom right when they turn 3. So it's a little bit difficult when they're coming in the middle of the year to kind of catch them up with the curriculum and what the other students are learning. From these barriers and facilitators, I identified 3 strategies to help with implementation of a social emotional program in the future. So the first is monthly meetings with all preschool teachers to discuss aspects of the program that are working well and other areas for adjustment. And then I was able to provide classroom teachers and support staff about the value of consistent social emotional programming. And then I also created a physical and virtual resource binder for educators and support staff to reference and easily access during implementation of the program. It's my hope that the educators at the early learning program will implement the provided resources and curriculum in the future to promote the development of preschoolers' self-regulation skills. I was also able to do a lot of other cool things throughout my capstone experience. I participated in classroom services for children ages 3 to 5. I also participated in home and community-based early intervention services for children ages 0 to 3. I gained a lot of clinical skills in early intervention, including parent coaching, structured observations and assessments, as well as ISFPs. I was able to implement the 8-session social emotional program that I created in the classroom. I also created parent handouts with information about fine motor development, gross motor development, feeding, and scissor skills, as well as how to practice these skills at home. As I mentioned, I created that teacher resource binder with the suggested evidence-informed 8-session social emotional curriculum, and I assisted with the social emotional group led by the social worker and her student. This is an example of an activity that I included in the curriculum, emotion wheels. So the idea is to have students color the emotion wheels, laminate them, and then give them to students to spin the arrow to show how they're feeling. So I suggested that students use these wheels at the beginning of each day or every social emotional session so students can practice identifying how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. As I mentioned, I was also able to implement that 8-session social emotional curriculum that I developed in one of the early learning program preschool classrooms. So this program was designed to take place during morning circle time and play centers. I started by reading a social emotional book, followed by a movement activity, including things like yoga or dance and music, and then students engaged in play centers. And I was in charge of a designated play center focused on social emotional learning and skill building. We completed activities like drawing our feelings and creating calm down glitter jars. I also had the opportunity to complete the other half of my capstone experience as a trainee in the Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, or LEND program, through the Nighsonger Center. LEND is a year-long interdisciplinary training program focused on improving the health of children with developmental disabilities and their families through clinical training, additional coursework, and leadership projects. As part of my time with LEND, I participated in the Interdisciplinary Developmental Clinic, which is a clinic for children ages 0 to 5, providing families with a comprehensive developmental evaluation for their child's developmental strengths, skills, and needs. I worked alongside a fellow OT student as well as SLP, PT, psychology, audiology, nutrition, genetics, and social work students. I was able to co-lead the interdisciplinary team with my fellow OT student Claire as primary clinicians. Additionally, the LEND program provided me with the opportunity to participate in a leadership project. I was a part of the Educational Supports Leadership Project, and the purpose of our project was to identify gaps in supports for children with autism spectrum disorder within a suburban Columbus elementary school and identify ways to support teachers and school faculty to help these children and their families. We created a Qualtrics survey that was sent out to the school faculty and staff, and then created resources for the educators at the school. I was also able to volunteer at Lifetown and observe at various community clinics at Nighsonger Center and Nationwide Children's, including the Cerebral Palsy Clinic, the Myelomeningocele Clinic, and the Transition Age Clinic. Finally, I was able to attend Ohio's Developmental Disabilities Advocacy and Awareness Day, which is what this picture is on the screen, which is a day where speakers share about disability-related issues and how we can become better advocates to encourage positive change. I feel really grateful that I was given the opportunity to be a LEND trainee and learn more about my role as a culturally competent interdisciplinary healthcare professional from self and family advocates, as well as the awesome LEND faculty and graduate students. And that is all. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.